Thank you all for joining us today, and welcome to this panel where we'll be focusing on the growth hacking and nation, where we'll discuss the opportunities, the discipline of growth hacking, and tech can potentially provide a nation to improve its wealth. My name is Jesper Løvendahl, and I'll be your guide for the next 29 minutes. This panel debate was put together because I think as a nation we can learn a lot from looking at and be inspired by how large, successful companies grow and prosper. And is it possible for a nation to copy the same strategies to gain opportunities, but maybe also look at the threats that this may bring? We'll have very little time. We'll put the Slido up after these slides, so please enter your questions as we go along. We'll debate the future opportunities, so I'll make some assumption and jump ahead and obvious challenges on the way to spark the more interesting and more ambitious discussion today. So please put on your positive, we'll put a man on the moon thinking, and let's see how that goes. So just to define what growth hacking is. Growth hacking is the mix between marketing, engineering, data analysis, and madness. It's the use of resource-light and cost-effective digital tactics to grow a business. And this is something that Fortune 1000 companies have now combined with artificial intelligence. Instead of having a human determine what the strategies are and best way to move forward, then the intelligence is making those leaps ahead and growing faster and cheaper. Moving toward AI 2030, AI will add 14 trillion euros to the global GDP. So how can we as a country, as a nation, tap into that? And that is combined the same output that China and India will do together, thus combined. A nation on the moon, so not a man on the moon. So again, put your large ambitions on when you hear this little session that we have here. So growth hacking a nation begins with the individual, knowledge, opportunities, and interaction. So the basis for the debate is that we already have the data available that we need on the people of a nation, and then we can move forward from there. So my first question goes to Carl-Johan Dalgaard, who is a professor at the University of Copenhagen University. And I'm sorry, we skipped a slide here. I was going to introduce our panel. Let's start with the panel introduction first. So here we have Carl-Johan Dalgaard, professor at the University of Copenhagen. We have Daria Krivonos, who is the CEO of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. And we have Michael Munk, who is the founder and the CEO of 2021 AI, a consulting company. And we have Tommy Alice, who is the member of parliament for Venstre, the Danish parliament. So moving forward with Carl-Johan Dalgaard, and a question to you. In your article, Flows of People, Flows of Ideas, and the Inequality of Nations, you and Professor Thomas Barnevik Andersen examined one of the primary reasons why some nations are wealthier than others. In your article, you focus on the effect of GDP by the transfer of technological knowledge across borders. You state, our results suggest that travel has a substantial impact on productivity. An increase in travel by 1% leads to an increase in productivity by roughly 2%, or 0.2%. That means an increase in travel of 5% would equal an increase of GDP by 1%. If, for Denmark, that is roughly 3 billion euros a year in annually, could this transfer of knowledge across the border also be done digitally on a global nation scale, including the global national population? That's a long question, sorry.
Well, yeah, that is indeed, and it's also a hard question. But perhaps I should start by simply stating that there is a potential there, but I think it's important for people to understand that when we did this research, well, actually by now nearly a decade ago, it was based on the hunch that maybe the main benefit of globalization from the point of view of productivity of nations, the main benefit had to do with diffusion and exchange of ideas, much more than the benefits that stems from movements of goods or movement of capital, such as which unleashes division of labor effects and these sort of things. Now, these days, this is less of a controversial idea among economists. It's more well accepted and well understood. But of course, the sort of estimates we get here is based on historical data, and given the fact that we used as a marker of interaction and exchange of ideas across nations, we used movements of people, temporary movements of people in and out of countries. That is based on the idea that, of course, the physical interaction of individuals is important. And so what we basically find is that up until now, historically, technology hasn't been able to remove the importance of face-to-face interaction fully. The cell phone and phones didn't do it, internet didn't do it. Maybe the future will bring it. But of course, if new technologies allows for a faster diffusion of ideas, it will matter for productivity, perhaps even as much as this.
Okay, wow, that's cool. Michael, so we're talking about artificial intelligence. You work on a daily basis with artificial intelligence. You consult companies. Could you just give us the broad benefits of artificial intelligence for those of us who are not all...
Yes, most certainly, and I believe, especially also in this context, normally what I sort of get into is the fact that artificial intelligence is really a question of reducing waste, right? So it's about reducing waste. That could be waste of time in a process. That could be waste of energy. It's waste today that accumulate because we don't have enough insight. And with more insight, we don't need to repeat those mistakes from the past. And that makes AI a bit more digestible for most people. Of course, there are certain elements, and that is becoming quite big for the moment, around the whole ethics, governance and such with AI, and I'm sure we'll come back to that.
We'll definitely come back to that. So we can ask ourselves, okay, so artificial intelligence, is it actually something that we as a nation, as Denmark in this case, are actually investing in? And Tommy, as a Minister of Higher Education and Science, you were part of securing 1.4 billion Danish kroner for research in 2019. And one of the things that I noticed that you were particularly excited about was the boost that this could give the research in artificial intelligence. How vital is further investments in AI and for a country like Denmark, and what are the biggest obstacles to keep up with other nations?
So actually we're investing 23 billion DKK a year in research. So the 1.4 was just to make sure that we got to the 1% of GDP, which we want as a nation to invest in research. And that was then in a negotiation last fall that I could then distribute to various, kind of top up in various research areas. And one of the things I prioritized back then was technology. It's a bit where I'm coming from, having built tech companies. I believe it's a foundation for a lot of stuff we want to do in various fields, right? In other research fields, including, for instance, health research, is to have a strong foundation from technology point of view. And one of the future strong foundations there is artificial intelligence. What I experienced back then, and still I think it's current, actually in part of the discussion that's been here today, is a sentiment around artificial intelligence that suddenly we start discussing, does it even matter? Does it even matter for us to do something because development, the other countries are investing so much? How stupid is that, right? If we start saying stuff like, it doesn't matter anymore, let's just quit now, right? Then we're doomed, right? So we need, and that's what we always as a small nation have to believe, is that we can bring something to the world and we still have a kind of a license to participate, which we do, for the reasons that some of you mentioned already, for instance, ethical use of this area, right? So
the biggest obstacle is basically our own mentality.
I don't see this. It's just a weird thing in the political debate around this. I don't see it in the world of research. There's a lot of belief that we can really do something. I think that the biggest obstacle right now is, do our companies and the public sector, so both private and public sector, are they willing to actually start using this, technology, AI, and a lot of other set of technologies to enhance their businesses? Because if we start doing that, so the applications of it, then we get much smarter on it. And so far, we have indications that that's not going that well in terms of applying it out there. I think Michael has some points on that.
Yeah,
so that's the obstacle. Do we use it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just very quickly, let's also now just realize we're only scratching the surface of AI. Right?
Exactly.
We're only scratching the surfaces. So giving up at this point in time would be, it does make sense.
So
We still need a lot of imagination, like this debate here, on how can we apply this in real life, right? So there will be tons of opportunities for us in this space.
quick question, Tommy. So if you were still minister, more investments in AI research going forward?
That's the beauty of our position. I can just promise a lot of stuff now. So yes, $1 billion more.
All right. That's
What currency?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You pick.
So I hang on. Sorry, I got everything. All of your profiles up here. I'm sorry. I'm forgetting to change the slides. I'm getting into this conversation a lot. So we'll just move back to the profiles. But Dasha, so talking about tech here, what are the opportunities and threats that you see in terms of democracy going forward?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I think first of all, and of course the AI experts could disagree, but I think any technology in the hands of humans is a combination of how we treat it, what we do with it, and then you have the outcome. So be it a benign or malicious application of any technology would define its future. When you look at democracy, I think they go hand in hand in the sense that the absence of a liberal democracy as we know it has allowed China to gather data and use it in a different way than we would be able to in Denmark. That's the absence of technology. And the general Chinese population finds it positive. Now, in Denmark, on the other hand, the fact that we have a liberal democracy, and this is one of my key examples, is that we move from something as a banal example of moving from parking meters on coins to parking meters on credit cards. We went from being anonymous to hoping for privacy. We didn't notice. It was a tiny little change. It made all the sense in the world because we no longer carry cash. But we had anonymity, and now we're hoping for privacy. And we count on the privacy because we have a liberal democracy.
And with artificial intelligence, there's a threat that further technology advantages in a society might create this gap between B people, A people, without defining who is who. Do you see technology, especially artificial intelligence, putting a booster on that as a threat to social mobility, or can it actually improve social mobility?
Well, on that I can actually be somewhat sure in saying I think it's a positive. I think some data at least, I guess we have a professor in here so I won't be too sure, but some data shows that if you look at the US, the most innovative states have shown both higher social mobility, but also some sort of course you have a top income inequality. So you have more people getting rich. You have the Bezos, you have the Bill Gates. Technology has fostered enormous wealth, and it's concentrated in the 1%. But below that, there's higher social mobility in states that show higher rates of patents, etc. So innovation seems to spur better mobility below the top 1%.
Okay, thank you. And jumping back to Tommy, how crucial is knowledge sharing? So you have across many different subjects like STEM, research, education, and startup emphasized on the importance of knowledge sharing and breaking down the silos. And you've done videos, you've done conferences with the emphasis not so much on the successes, but more on the mistakes and sharing those mistakes so they're not repeated. Like what Michael said about artificial intelligence is that it actually helps us not repeat so many mistakes. How crucial is knowledge sharing for someone to be inspired here in this startup community, to inspire to move forward with an idea, and secondly, potentially succeeding with a startup compared to the variables others in startup?
I think I got it.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I think that's the beauty of the what we call the startup ecosystem is the willingness to share across companies, and knowledge travels in many ways. It travels when you meet each other at a conference like this. It travels because employees go from one company to another company. We share investors, we share advisors, all of that, right? So we are, what I love about the startup community is so good at sharing knowledge, right? Yep. And then, big companies, not so much. At least not the ones I've seen. I've seen Vodafone, I've seen Citrix. Because there is knowledge is also power, right? And that's also a bit what I see in politics is that, you sit on your knowledge and try to protect it, because if I know more than you, I can trade this, right? So I start trading it, and that's not getting the full value of knowledge, because then you're just trying to optimize for your own situation and not for the greater good. So I learned this at at McKinsey. I was there 4 years from when I was 25 to 29, and there one of the major things that McKinsey does is no one can say no, no matter how senior you are in the organization and how junior the person asking, you can never refuse to do an interview. Someone calling you, I call a senior partner in Boston, I just started 2 weeks ago, and ask some questions. If I'm well prepared in terms of the questions I want to ask, they'll always be willing to share the knowledge. And that creates a lot of, because then we allow other people to learn from our mainly mistakes, but also the things that worked. And if we can increase that across society, that becomes much better at doing that, then we have a lot. And we have it, then we create a lot of value. And I think we're kind of doing that in Denmark because we have a lot of trust. We do trust each other. That's one of the key components of the Danish society. We trust each other. So also trust that you'll not fuck me. Fuck with my ideas, even though I shared them with you. So I'm actually willing to do that in the Danish society, and that's a beauty here. So we have a chance.
So trust is actually also key when we go digital.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Carl-Johan, adding
can
to
I
that,
just follow up on something that Tommy said, because I think it's very important that one of the challenges that new technologies in digital technology, information technology opens up is the creation precisely of sort of imperfect competition and enclaves of monopoly based on information, and being able to keep that information and keeping others from that information. I mean, one of the foundations of growth and prosperity is this dynamism, whereby new, more productive firms replace perhaps older, less productive firms. Now that process, inherently is facilitated by the fact that if you already have sort of a patent on something and you're really good at it, entrants, well, they will be willing to fight harder in order to take over that market than yourself, because you're going to replace yourself and take out the profits you have right now. The only thing that keeps that process from actually working is if you have a cost advantage for the person who's inside, and you get that from information. So that's a major challenge, and for regulatory, econ policy in the future to keep that from destroying the growth process.
Carl-Johan, following up on that question of sharing knowledge, reusing knowledge, and the value of it. Now you and your colleague calculated the value of that transfer over cross-border. But is there a value in these times with focus on recycling, where we can actually help technology, with the help of technology, can recycle vast amount of the valuable knowledge gained by individuals abroad? Because the inspiration that we get in a small country like this and other smaller countries is probably 99% coming from abroad. So how do we recycle that, and does that have a value as well? Looking back at the calculation that you did in terms of transferring knowledge cross borders, transferring recycled knowledge domestically?
Again, so if new technologies makes it easier to access information, that's a big deal. Why is it a big deal? Because scientific knowledge has sort of this particular property to it. It's non-rival, meaning that many people can use a piece of information simultaneously without limiting each other in the effectiveness of the idea. So think of a math formula. I can use, let's say, the Pythagoras theorem, and my ability to use that is not limited in any way by a billion Chinese people doing it at the same time. The result is the same. But of course, the foundation is that I know about, have the knowledge. If that process is sped up by digital technologies, of course it has a major ramification, because it directly influences millions of people simultaneously because of this non-rival quality. It hasn't happened yet, as I think Tom is already alluding to, and that's one of the main sources of concern. What are the barriers? What are the costs that allows for an effective utilization in practice of these technologies? Because we see it everywhere, but we don't see it in the national account statistics, to be sure.
So looking at a conference like this one today, there are 7,500 people signed up for this. There might be one person out there for each of us that could make a huge difference for us, impact our lives significantly. That person might be sitting next to you, but because you have headsets on, you can't talk to that person. You might not get that knowledge. But how do we find that? How does these coincidences that it is going to a conference and meeting those people, how can AI, Michael, help us increase those positive coincidences?
Well, I think we just heard it in the panel here also. It's more about what will we allow AI to do for us, right? What will we opt into? How many data will we volunteer? How much information are we willing to offer from ourselves into this? So I think the question is more if looking at such a scenario here, really not play it out too big, because then very, very fast people are going to opt out and say either this is a little bit scary, or they're going to say no, now you're intruding my rights to do certain things. So one example that a guy I work with very often comes with is that yes, autonomous vehicles are a bit scary for the moment, right? But he doesn't really argue with his ABS brakes anymore. He doesn't really argue to use it or not, right? So this is all about us getting more and more used to these new technologies, and that's a bit scary still for most people. So and of course, I'm not debating at all that governance, ethics, trustworthiness around this are of key importance. And going back to also the fact that's an area where I think we could play a role in Denmark, where we could sort of offer something to the rest of the world, also within AI.
Dasha, so looking at digital identity and the control of your information, like Michael said, self-sovereign digital identity is a crucial part of any sharing going forward, is controlling our identity, the citizen's individual security. How do you see future possibilities for the individuals to protect their identity, and how could that work going forward?
Well, I think you mentioned one of the things that will help your very positive scenario happen. I think in order to have complete free sharing of data and utilization of same, and have AI benefit society most and harvest all this data, is to have people take back control of it. Because I think GDPR in Europe is an example of, so data and AI and technology in many ways it's a combination of access and control. Yeah. For many years we've handed over access. Now we're taking back control. So GDPR is a cumbersome 200 emails in May, which we all just said yes to, right? And you're like, whoa, did I visit that ever? It was cumbersome, but it was a sign of people taking control back. Now, was it the most fluent way of doing it? Probably not. But if you were to introduce something as a sovereign digital identity, which means basically that I can compartmentalize the data that I have, the data that I share, and do it in a way that only is given to the people and the entities it concerns. So an example would be Amazon. When I buy something, Amazon knows where I live, they know my name, they know my credit card, they know my book preference, sometimes my gender, whatever else I hand it over. In the end, what Amazon needs to know is that I can pay for it, that I exist as a human being or as an individual and I can pay for it. The mailman only needs to know where I live, and the author only needs to know that the book was sold. But right now, I'm handing over everything to one platform. Now, sovereign digital identity would allow for me to choose who can see what and when. And it opens up for opportunities, because I'm not sure I want to manage my identity every day, every time I interact with anything, and that means, well, will we have identity managers out there for us? Business opportunity.
And if you had full control of your digital identity, so the information you share, the information you actually can retract at any time when you're done sharing it, would this mean the end of GDPR?
It would mean the full right implementation of GDPR, because it's a global data protection protocol, right? And in the end, it's about protecting your data and your right to own it. And I guess this would just be a far more efficient way of doing it than just saying yes or no to cookies every time you open a website.
So, Carl-Johan, meeting in person, you touched on that earlier, and you also wrote in your article, even general technological tech knowledge is often not completely codified, which implies that it can only be transmitted fully if individuals meet in person. Why is this so?
Well, historically it appears to have been the case. I mean, part of it is perhaps because people tend to attach greater significance to information which comes from sources they're comfortable with, like people you know, people who you trust as a consequence. So there are lots of examples of this. So that's part of it. Another part is that it's not easy to attain it artificially, because in most cases it's just extremely costly to codify all knowledge. That might be cheaper in the future, admittedly, but the question is whether we will attach the same value to it. So, small example of this. So think of the Green Revolution, where you had these new strains of crops, and turned out there was these big sort of campaigns organized by the government in various countries, and turned out in the end that most farmers, they only relied on the information they got from neighbors and friends who said this is a great idea, and not so much the government campaigns. So it seems that this is also important, and it's a question of whether technology can completely eliminate those sort of cognitive biases. That's the exciting question.
So looking into the future, we shouldn't be afraid that we'll all end up in one of these game chairs in a one-bedroom apartment, and our AI avatars running around out there doing everything for us, because
that's your department, but I don't think it would be good for economic growth.
So there is still a need for the in-person. That's good. So Tommy, utilizing the power of AI, how do you think we as a nation could utilize that to deliver the right knowledge, contacts, opportunities, even funding to people with a good idea for a startup? So moving forward, how can we put an event like this with a boost of AI? Is that an opportunity?
No, but there's not an industry that we cannot transform completely with the use of AI, right? In terms of doing things smarter. A bit like Michael said, we can reduce a lot of waste, public sector, private sector. So that question is like, what can we use a computer for? Everything and nothing, right? And we, so we also have to, sometimes people, sometimes it's just, technology down here, and we call it something new and interesting, and then we all get both concerned and think it can change a lot. This will change a lot gradually over time, but I cannot point at how this conference would be different, right? But it's just like, I think the key point here is if I can get smarter at a conference, like finding the right individual to talk to and all of that, so sort through the noise, reduce some, not calling people waste, but I don't have to talk to 5 people in order to get to the person that actually will give me the right idea or the right input, right? All of that, and we're doing that kind of already, right? We write each other on LinkedIn before we go in, and LinkedIn has an algorithm on trying to sort out who's most relevant for me, right? So I think it's gradually happening out there.
So so jumping on to Michael, the obstacle now, seeing the obstacle of actually moving forward with AI. You're consulting companies right now. What are obstacles that you see that they have to overcome as a company, and how would that translate into a nation overcoming those same obstacles to hack itself?
Well, I think what we're seeing now is that AI is still a nascent technology. It's still young, right? And for any technology coming sort of out of the experimental state into production, a lot of things are happening, also historically. And with AI, this is not going to be less. And I see this question here, why is AI governance so important? And that is exactly why it's very important. It's very, very important that we sort of at least track the things we do. So far, a lot of AI developers, data scientists have had more or less free play developing models. They have not really thought about the consequences. And another thing happening is that we're starting to see these, you can say, hacker attacks into AIs, into algorithms. These example of hacking, the speed signs on highways and stuff like that, turning a turtle into a rifle when a certain AI look at this, and that is really bad, right? So we really need to have a very, very strong governance eye on both data and the whole thing surrounding this, right?
Jumping over to Dasha, what concerns? So a final answer here on the current concerns that we should have, giving AI too much control of us and too much guidance in terms of the decision that we make going forward.
Well, first of all, AI is not perfect. Anyone who's seen Terminator would be able to recall Skynet, and of course that's what we all fear. But now Estonia, I'll be brief. Estonia is testing or looking to test judges, or so to have AI judges, and it's only settlements of cases of I think 7,000 euros or dollars or below, financial settlement. Now, if it was your case, what would you like to be in place for this system to rule correctly? Now, take that forward and say, what if it was a murder trial? What would you like to be in place for that? And then what if it were to vote for you? Collect all your data. It knows more about you than you do. Perhaps it would vote better. So 4 things, borrowing from the scientists and experts, I'd say verification, building the systems right, validation, so building the right systems, control, so always have a human on the last switch, and then security, of course, hacks and malware, etc. So the 4 elements: validation, verification, control, and security.
And how do we determine what human?
I think we're out of time.
Yeah. No. So a last final one. So looking at the subject that we had today, growth hacking a nation, is it so different from growth hacking a company, or what do you think? Carl-Johan Dalgaard, last comment, each of us, you 30 seconds.
I think it's different.
It's different? Is it an option?
Well, it's a fine question.
Michael?
I think it's very different. I also think we should think about the data we all put on LinkedIn today. We put on a server in the US to LinkedIn to make value out of that. So why not do that within a group that could be a nation?
So what you're saying is the data that we now have on Silicon Valley servers through Google, Apple, LinkedIn, Facebook, should we as a nation could take more control of that?
I'm not saying we should take more control, but we should put it in perspective that we are willingly putting out these chunks of information to others for the moment.
Yeah. Daria?
I think my overall comment would just be ambition and caution in this particular case.
Yeah. And Tommy?
I've been trying to run businesses and been trying to be part of running a country. And those 2 things are very, very different, right? Because as a country, on a societal level, it's just much, the balances you have to do there are just so different than what you do in a company, which is basically a profit maximizing. And then you can have other purposes, and hopefully so, but basically profit maximizing, right? On a country level, societal level, they're just luckily some different things, right? Art, culture, conversations, happiness, all of that, right? How do you take that into play? And therefore, I love the idea of hacking stuff. I will always love that, but it is a different animal to, on a country level than it is on a business level.
This was, thank you to our panel. This was the beginning of just, mind-boggling, putting an idea out there and doing something different than you might have seen during this conference. So thank you for your patience, thank you for your participation, and Godspeed getting on that moon.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you both.